What infamous movie plot hole has an explanation that you're tired of explaining? The first rule of Fight Club, and their growing number of members, is because it is meant to teach the members to break rules. I see a lot of new faces here, which means a lot of you have been breaking the first two rules. Camera pans to everyone smirking. It's pretty obvious that this is the most commonly broken rule, and their fearless leader doesn't give a shit about it being broken. He breaks many of his own rules, including when he nearly beats Jared Leto to death. A bigger plot hole was that someone wanted to fight Brad Pitt v. Edward Norton after he was beating himself up in a parking lot. That's not a guy you even look at, let alone ask for a fair one. Everyone always asks why there was a desert in Washington, D.C. in Transformers 2. It has been clearly explained in a ton of discussions of that movie that it was just a really bad movie. LMAO, never realized it was Washington. Yep. They were in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, and when they go outside there is an airplane graveyard in a desert. Is there some kind of Mandela effect going on with the Titanic movie? Why doesn't Rose let Jack get on? They can both fit. Jack does try to get on. It starts to sink with both of their weight on it. It's a case of people thinking if they spent enough time solving the problem, they could figure it out. Hell, Mythbusters showed that by rigging up the life preservers, they could both fit on. It was dark and the water was ice cold. Every minute in the water was risking death. They tried it once, it failed, Jack made a call. That was an entirely reasonable decision given the circumstances. The flaw in the Death Star's construction. We didn't need Rogue One to explain it was a deliberate sabotage. So an exhaust port has a flaw. It is not unreasonable to believe that the flaw was necessitated for efficiency. Knowing that the flaw was inevitable, the trench leading up to the port was protected with gun towers. Tarkin, along with other officers, fully believed that the Death Star was superior in its construction, that small fighters would pose no threat to them. During the Rebel assault, an officer pointed out to Tarkin that the Rebel attack is exploiting this weakness and offers to prepare a transport for him, to which Tarkin responds, "Evacuate." In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances. To them, the weakness is negligible, that there is no chance a Rebel fighter would be able to drop torpedoes into the port. And they were right. The first fighter to make an attempt failed. Luke was only able to succeed because he used the Force instead of the computer, something no one anticipated because they all believed that the Jedi were extinct. Also, for the missile to travel the length of the exhaust port without smacking into a wall and prematurely detonating before it reached the core was 1 in a million. Like, did you see that 90-degree turn it did right into the port? Luke didn't just use the Force to guide it in, he used the Force to guide it in and all the way to the core. Tarkin was completely right to think it was impossible, because without magic it was. It all came down to arrogance. Vader was also right when he said the power to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force. Friends. How did they pay for that apartment on their salary in New York? The very first episode, Monica mentions that her grandma owned the apartment, and she would never be able to afford it otherwise. And it was rent-controlled, plus I think it was an illegal sublease, and they had to hide that from the super. From Independence Day. How could a virus programmed on Earth computers destroy the computer system of an alien civilization? In a deleted scene, it's revealed that technology from the spaceship at Area 51 was harvested and used as the basis for most of Earth's post-WW2 computer technology. Once you know that, the whole thing becomes a lot more believable. I prefer to think that the alien computers couldn't decipher the Mac OS, so it exploded itself. Lord of the Rings. The Eagles. They are not a taxi service, they would be subject to the Ring influence too. There are flying Nazgul that could intercept them, there is a big fucking spotlight eye that could shine on them the moment they approach the border of Mordor. Failing all that, an entire army of Orc could wait at Mount Doom, making any approach impossible. Edit, the Eagles are sentient and sapient, they are not mindless beasts that just do whatever the rider wants. Couldn't agree more. They aren't just the Eagles either. They are the Eagles of Manwë, the King of Arda. Not a fucking Uber. How does Sarah Connor know which button to press to crush the Terminator in Terminator, 1984? Because she accidentally presses it a few minutes earlier and it set the crusher off, it what lead the Terminator to find them. Oh, like in The Incredibles where Elastigirl has the remote and Bob tells her to push that button again. Jack and Rose couldn't both fit on the door in Titanic. In the movie, they try to both get on the door and it capsizes, because the door isn't buoyant enough with both of them on it. Jack then gets off the door so Rose can get more of herself out of the water. It's in the movie. They try to do it in the movie and it doesn't work. It doesn't matter how much surface area the door had, it's the buoyancy of the door that was the problem. Mythbusters did it where they took the life jacket Rose had and tied it to the weak corner of the door, giving it enough lift for both of them to survive. So all Jack and Rose needed to do was put their engineering degrees to good use, write out a plan, experiment with different ways of staying afloat, and they would have been just fine. James Cameron actually responded to that with his own experiment. He has two people play Jack and Rose and wear thermometers both internally and externally and used a copy of the door from the movie. If they had both stayed on it, they would have been in the water too much, and both would have died from hypothermia. Dark Knight Rises, how did Bruce Wayne magically get to Gotham after he escaped the hole? In an adjacent scene it's mentioned the bomb will go off in a month, so we can assume that's how long he has to get back to Gotham. Wayne Enterprises has offices around the world. All he needs to do is get to an office, log in, and wire himself money or supplies to get home. He's Batman, he can easily do this without being noticed. Batman Begins has a whole sequence of him traveling around the world penniless and nameless. This is a specific skill it's already established he has. There are tons of plot holes in that movie, but for some reason people get hung up on the easiest one to explain. The bigger plot hole was Bruce Wayne healing a busted spine by popping a vertebrae into place and hanging from a rope for a bit in a dungeon. I ain't Doogie Howser, but that doesn't seem realistic. One of Charles Foster Kane's servants was outside his bedroom when Kane said Rosebud. The door was wide open. The dialogue later confirms that a butler heard Kane's dying words and reported it to the paper. In Jurassic World, Claire didn't outrun the T-Rex in heels because it wasn't chasing her. The dinosaur was conditioned to equate the flare with feeding time, so it was patiently following her to an anticipated meal. The situation is similar to how zookeepers can have limited interactions with lions and bears. Tom Cruise is not the last Samurai, Ken Watanabe is. Cruise is just the POV character. It's not a white savior movie, but instead is a white colonialist learning about the value of native cultures and people. People sometimes wonder how Indiana Jones initially remained skeptical of the mystical events happening in the second film, when he just witnessed a magical arc mass killing a bunch of Nazis in the first film. But that's because the second film is a prequel. For the people who spend all the Star Wars movies saying, why don't they just Jedi mind trick everyone into doing this or that, Obi-Wan is very clear the first time he uses it that it works on those weak-minded. I think the way stormtroopers function throughout the first 3 films shows they aren't the sharpest tools in the shed and are probably bred, trained, selected to do whatever without question and just be cannon fodder. Not a bad one, but the DeLorean in Back to the Future always being brought up in conversations as actually it was a really crappy car. Like. Yes. That was the joke. Marty even asks Doc incredulously, you built a time machine out of a DeLorean. The car became famous because of BTTF. Before then, it was a laughingstock. Horridly underpowered with a shitty European V6 and incredibly fragile transmission, massive QC issues, and John DeLorean himself was a tool. On watching The Sixth Sense it may seem completely improbable that Bruce Willis' character didn't realize that he was dead. Yet it's explained right there in the movie, ghosts see only what they want to see. Home Alone, it's very clearly explained how they paid for the trip to Paris and that Kevin's dad didn't foot the bill. Toy Story. Buzz stops moving in front of humans, but doesn't think he's a toy. His delusion is the whole point. It's what drives Woody crazy. He tries explaining it to him. You are a toy. I've said this for a while now, I'll defend the movie Home Alone with my life. Kevin got left behind because his family was mad at him and obviously didn't like him that much. He was in his room and there was so much chaos. Also other factors such as we see his passport ticket being accidentally thrown away, and a neighbor kid snooping through the van accidentally gets counted. Why didn't Kevin call the police? The phone lines were down. We also see Kevin's mum talking to the police, but they don't care or take her seriously. Also, it is likely that Kevin didn't trust the police because the burglar disguised himself as a cop. Kevin recognized his golden tooth. The thing people bring up that has some validity is how Kevin pulled off the traps and how he had some of the stuff he used. For this it's just expected to suspend your disbelief because it's a comedy for kids. But also some things are plausible. I can fully believe that young boys in the 90s had a Michael Jordan cardboard cutout. I am so late to the party but... Legally blonde. OMG, a dumb blonde sorority girl studied for the LSAT for a summer and aces it? Bullshit. No. No, the point is that Elle Woods was never a dumb blonde. She was always brilliant. Literally, the first scene is her interrogating the salesperson and catching them in a lie because she was observant and smart. Rather, Elle was pigeonholed by the circumstances of her looks and her privileged upbringing to pursue a vapid life. While inspired by the wrong reasons, it results in her breaking the mold she was confined in so that she is able to reach her full potential. In Memento, people always wonder how a guy with short-term memory loss remembers he has memory loss. But he's conditioned himself to say it, just like Sammy was subjected to conditioning in the flashbacks. Not exactly a plot hole, but I hate when people misinterpret the scene in The Incredibles where Violet saves Dash from being shot as her intending to take the bullets for him. Yes, Dash says, "How are you doing that?" And she responds, "I don't know," but that he means is suspending herself in midair inside a spherical force field, which she's never done before. She already knew how to make dome-shaped fields big enough to cover Dash. We saw her do that when they were fighting at dinner earlier in the movie. She jumped in front of Dash because that was the only way she could get close enough to him in time to protect him, since she had not yet learned how to make force fields far away from herself like we see her do when fighting the Underminer in the sequel. She's all that. So, he makes a bet that he can make a pretty girl into the hot girl when all it takes is taking off her glasses and fixing her hair and changing her out of overalls and into a red dress. No. The bet was that he could make Lainey Boggs into a prom queen over the more popular but less likable Taylor Vaughn. Zack explicitly points out that she's scary and inaccessible, an antisocial artsy chick who shuts herself off from people and hides in her basement to paint. It isn't until he does chores for her to free up her time enough to get her to leave the house and go to the beach and join a party that she becomes well known enough to be a serious contender for prom queen. Also, Lainey still loses. As it turns out, fixing up her appearance doesn't automatically help her win a popularity contest. How did Andy reattach the poster after he crawled into the tunnel? He didn't. The poster was only attached at the top, as evidenced by the scene where he is seen digging into the wall under the poster, then looking out when he hears someone coughing, then ducking back under it. The poster is clearly securely attached at the top but freely moving at the bottom, thus allowing Andy to lift it, let it fall back down whenever he needed.